For your ears only for the week of April 13th and Passover, I'm David Alpern.
I'm Mark Garber. Quote from the news, "No one should be fooled, and believe me, no one is fooled." That was Secretary of State John Kerry before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, accusing Moscow of instigating more separatist actions among Russia supporters in eastern Ukraine. Also last week, NATO released satellite photographs showing up to 40,000 Russian troops and armament at the Ukraine border that could, quote, move in a matter of hours. Now this.
Last week, we announced that 7.1 million Americans have signed up for private insurance through the marketplace. As of this week, 400,000 additional Americans have signed up, and we expect that number to continue to grow.
Yes, they broke the law, but it's not a felony. It's an act of love.
Kathleen Sebelius brought good news to Congress last week, even more than predicted sign-ups for troubled Obamacare. But the White House was still happy to accept her resignation as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, by contrast, was guilty of heartfelt heresy on illegal immigration, at least for his Republican Party's conservative base. But nevertheless, he was back in the pack of GOP White House prospects, maybe even its leader.
To talk more about those Capitol ins and outs and other political developments of the week, including Medicare moneymaking, campaign finance, and the gender pay debate, for your ears only, we're joined again by John Hudak, Brookings Institution Fellow in Governance Studies and managing editor of its FixGov blog. His new book is Presidential Pork, White House Influence Over the Distribution of Federal Grants. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
Let's start with Sebelius. As a former Kansas governor, did she have enough savvy to know she had to go after the disastrous rollout of Obamacare's website, even if the White House did not insist?
Kathleen Sebelius was really in a difficult place. I think she had an idea of what she was signing up for broadly. She knew that she was signing on to support a president who wanted a comprehensive health care bill passed. But I don't think she had any idea what the administrative extent of the law would end up being and how many managerial problems would come on around it. Frankly, as a governor of a small state, I don't think she had any preparation for that sort of thing, but I don't think a governor of any state would have.
Should Obama himself have been more involved with his signature program?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, one of the president's greatest weaknesses is his inability to manage. And I think the best thing for the health care law was for the president to be hands-off in a direct way. What he needed to do, rather than engaging or involving himself directly, was to have gotten more competent managers involved, more competent administrators, people with more experience at handling large-scale administrative rollouts and dealing with large-scale website design. That's the best thing the president could have done. In terms of sort of being hands-off, that probably prevented a bigger problem from happening.
Now, how do you assess the political, administrative, and technology savvy of Sebelius' successor, the current head of the White House Office of Management and Budget?
Sylvia Burwell is a quite talented individual. She's been at OMB. She's run major foundations, including Gates and Walmart. She has administrative experience for sure. The question is going to be with her how well she can coordinate what is a really disparate administrative apparatus to start working better together and continue working in a positive way, the kind of positive way we've seen in the past 3 months compared to these 6 or 7 months in advance of the rollout and then including the rollout itself.
Some Republicans seem to be shifting away from Obamacare as their major issue in this year's midterm elections. How do you see it continuing to play politically?
Well, the biggest problem for Republicans is an Obamacare success. And I think what we're seeing right now in terms of signups, in terms of public opinion about this, in terms of states' experience with the program, is that the conversation is really beginning to turn positive when it comes to the Affordable Care Act. That there is no bigger disaster for the Republican Party, and particularly Republicans in Congress, than a popular and effective Affordable Care Act. And so they're running away from it right now because I think in a lot of corners they're starting to get worried. And no one's worried more than Mitch McConnell, who has been an opponent of the Affordable Care Act since day one, and his state is the poster child for success.
Last week, we saw an unprecedented data dump by Medicare that made it possible to track the doctors who bill most for which procedures and with what political connections. Democratic in some of the most dramatic cases. How valuable was that to experts like yourself and ordinary Americans concerned about care?
as a scientist, any amount of data dump from the federal government or from any organization is good news. Good news to me and good news to my colleagues. It promotes efficiencies, or it can create efficiencies. It promotes transparency, and it allows people both inside and outside of government to get a better idea of how government is working. And sometimes it means sort of revealing some of the bad behavior that government and private industry can engage in, but at the same time it can reveal where government is doing a good job. And I think as the Medicare program, it certainly has its flaws, but it also has real effectiveness and real efficiency in it that a lot of people in HHS might want to look to about how to administer the Affordable Care Act and how to administer health care laws within the states and across the nation.
President Obama made a big pitch for a Fair Pay Act to close the long-standing gap between men and women generally, but it failed in the Senate again and ran into some reality checks that showed much more equality when factors like actual job definition, experience, age, and hours worked are considered. How do you and your FixGov experts see that issue?
The question of fair pay and equal pay is surely a complicated one empirically. There's research out there that shows that women definitely, there's research that suggests women make far less than their similarly appointed peers. And there's other research that argues that if you take into other factors, as you said, that the pay gap is much smaller or it dries up. That said, I think this is an issue where looking at the social science results glosses over some very important points, and that is there are definitely corners of the American economy where women are paid less than men. Maybe it's not systematic, but that kind of discrimination definitely exists. And for a president who prides himself in getting rid of discrimination, this is an important issue for him. And maybe across the board, pay differences don't exist, though I believe they do. I think the president's goal is to root it out wherever it is, and that's good policy on his part, and it's very good politics on his part.
John, on the Republican side, what did you make of the Jeb Bush remarks on immigration, the conservative blowback, but increasing presidential mention from political pundits? Was he signaling to moderates and independents who may be writing off New Jersey Governor Chris Christie because of the George Washington Bridge lane closing scandal?
Yeah, it seems like Jeb Bush is at least floating the idea in his own mind of possibly running for president, and I think he's putting feelers out to see how much traction he can really get outside of punditry and outside of media who try to find darlings whenever they can. But at the same time, I think you're right. What Jeb Bush is also doing is signaling to moderates in the party, frankly, signaling to the mature elements of the Republican Party, we're on the right side of history, we're on the right side of policy, and don't be bullied by more extreme elements of your party when you want to stand up and talk about what you think is right. And I think on the immigration front, maybe politically it wasn't the best thing for Jeb Bush, but he was certainly showing what he thinks to be true and what he thinks to be the right policy for America.
John Hudak is a Brookings Institution Fellow in Governance Studies and managing editor of its FixGov blog.
Quote from the news, is that part of Cirque du Soleil? I didn't know that solid waste management was so controversial. That was Hillary Clinton during her speech to a meeting of the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries in Las Vegas after a woman in the audience threw a shoe at her.
Next, showbiz ins and outs. Letterman, Colbert, Walters, Rooney. For your ears only.